Does it really sound better, or is it just louder? Some really interesting artists have been going viral on social media recently. Two that I've noticed in particular are Radiohead and Imogen Heap. Her song Headlock has just gone platinum 20 years after it was originally released. And to celebrate the 20th anniversary, there is a new remastered edition of Speak for Yourself, which is the album that Headlock was originally part of. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a listen to that because remasters often get a lot of negative feedback. People are uncertain about the changes that are made to the sound, and often they're remastered much louder, which is not necessarily a good thing. And being an Imogen Heap fan, I was really curious to take a listen. So in this video, I'm going to do a detailed comparison of the song Headlock so that you can hear the differences between the remaster and the original for yourself and decide what you think. But before that, I thought I would take a look at the overall sound of the album to try and find out, does it really sound better or is it just louder? So the first thing that I did was to just listen to it on Apple Music with my Apple AirPods, and I really enjoyed it. I felt like I was hearing things that I hadn't necessarily noticed before in the arrangements and in the performances. But it's been a long time since I've listened in detail to that album, and I have no idea what earbuds I was originally using. The AirPods are pretty good in comparison to earlier Apple earbuds for sure. But also, things will just sound different if you listen to it on a different monitoring system. So, being me, I brought the album back into the studio and fired it up to take a listen. And probably the first thing to say is that yes, the album overall is slightly louder, but interestingly, there are some differences between the different songs. And I thought I would start off by showing you that and telling you what effect I think that has on the way that the album feels when you listen to it. And then also we can dive into Headlock in more detail. So probably the first thing that most people do when they're trying to compare some different audio files is to bring them into a DAW. I'm using Wavelab and take a look at the waveforms, but we can immediately see that the waveforms are not really telling us anything very useful about the loudness. They've both been limited, and I'm not seeing huge differences between them. There are probably some subtle differences there if we look at them, but the reality is that peak levels are an absolutely terrible way of judging loudness. So instead, I've opened up these masters in my Loudness Penalty Studio application, which is designed for exactly this. So we've got here the original on the left and the 20th anniversary on the right. And you can see the software represents each song as a block. Here, the pink line is the overall loudness of the song, and that's what's going to be used on streaming platforms to decide whether or not the volume should be reduced when the files are loudness matched. The top of the block shows the peak level. The top of this white section shows the top of the loudness range, which is a reasonable indicator of the loudest moments of the song. And the bottom of the white area is the bottom of the loudness range, which is often close to the quietest sections of the song. And we can see some interesting details in these graphical representations, but I'm actually going to start with the numbers. And just starting at the end of the album, you can see here that so this column here is the integrated LUFS for each song. The moment I said it on the original release was minus 12.3 LUFS overall. On the reissue, it's minus 12. Closing in was minus 10.4. On the reissue, it's minus 10.1. On the original, it was minus 11.2. Here it's minus 10.7, so half a dB louder. These are really quite small loudness differences. I think overall we can agree that there is not a massive difference in loudness between the remaster and the original, which is interesting just to begin with, apart from the first two songs. So Headlock is showing as minus 11 in the remaster, whereas originally it was minus 12.3. And Say Goodnight and Go is showing as minus 10, whereas in the original it was minus 12. So Headlock is about a dB louder, and Say Goodnight and Go is about 2 dB louder. After that, the differences get much more subtle. So that answers an immediate question, which is that this is not a remaster that has made everything much louder. I think that's great news because, to me, those original loudness values were right at the top end of what I would consider the loudness sweet spot. I've always loved the dynamics of Speak for Yourself. I'm really pleased they didn't make a decision when they remastered it to push the loudness super hard to try and compete with some of the other mainstream releases that are out there. But it is interesting that they've made Headlock and Goodnight and Go slightly louder. And I think the other thing that is interesting before we do a comparison to see whether louder means better or not is to notice that the true peak values here on the original master are a little bit hotter than they are over here on the remaster. That's the kind of thing that we would expect. True peaks weren't really on anybody's radar back in the day, whereas at this point people are paying more attention to them. There's an interesting variety in the true peak levels there, but the differences are very small. Enough numbers and technicality, let's take a listen to Headlock and see whether it really is better or just louder. So let's zoom in on the track in question, the first track on the album. And I'll just start off by playing you the remastered version, the special edition 2025 version, and the original master at the levels they've actually been mastered at, so you can hear how that sounds. And for me, the remastered version, the first time I listened to it on AirPods, I felt like I was noticing the cello parts and the backing vocals more than I was used to. So I'll flick between those so that you can get it's easier to compare them when you go directly from one to the other. See what you think of this.
Distant flickering screen of scenery.
And I think you can immediately hear that the remastered version is indeed louder. And if we just skip forward to when things get a bit busier.
I got your heart in a headlock. I don't believe any of it. You say too late to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this.
So that proves to me that I wasn't mad when I listened on AirPods. But of course, we already know that this remastered version is louder. So let's just reduce this by a dB. The actual integrated loudness difference between these two is 1.3 dB. But what I found is that if I play one of the loudest sections of the track and compare, the overall loudness difference is slightly deceptive.
I don't believe any of it. Just like too late to start with your heart in a headlock.
So on the original, that short section there has an overall loudness of minus 7.7 LUFS, whereas on the remaster, with the volume reduced by a dB,
I don't believe any of it. Just like too late to start with your heart in a headlock.
you can see that's minus 7.8. So those are very closely matched, if not exactly matched. And I think that's the fairest way to compare these songs. If I turn this one down by a further 0.3 dB, then this loud section where there's most going on and we might hear the most effects of compression and limiting will actually sound a little bit quiet, which will fool us. So now I'll switch between those two so you can hear how those sound.
Better than this. Come make a star, got your heart in a headlock. No, I don't believe any of it. Just so too late to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this. It's late to start, got your heart in a headlock. I don't believe any of it. Just so too late to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this.
I think you'll agree those are pretty closely matched. There are a few moments where I feel like I'm getting a little bit more punch and impact from the original version than the remaster, but we're not hearing massive pumping or limiting or distortion or any kind of major problems. And of course, now that the loudness is matched, the apparent difference in sound is a lot smaller. You might have thought there was a huge difference in sound between these two different versions when I played you the initial examples where the loudness wasn't matched. Once we've matched the loudness, we hear things much more accurately. What's interesting though is that when we go back to the introduction and listen to that again, let me just play that. We'll start with the remastered version.
Distant flickering screen of scenery. Distant flickering.
To me, the original version still sounds a little bit thinner The cellos sound fuller, Imogen's voice sounds richer on the remaster. Let's try flicking directly from one to the other to check that.
Distant flickering, screen has scenery, a swear that's bringing it all back again. Great adventures, faces in condensation. I'm going outside to take it all in. You say too late to start, got your heart in a headlock. I don't believe any of it. You say too late to start with your heart in a headlock.
And I think probably, hopefully you can hear that as well. It's subtle, but I do feel there's a bigger, warmer low end on the remastered version, which is exactly the kind of thing you would expect from a sensitive remaster. It's listening to the original going, how can we make this even better? You know, for me, when I listened to that, I liked the fact that I was noticing the cello and the backing vocals, those deep vocals in the remastered version. But I also wonder whether actually the remastered version is still sounding a little bit louder in this section. So let's just kind of jump forward to a busier section and do that comparison. I still think that's a little bit louder. I'm going to try pulling this back by 2.5 dBs, so an extra 1.5 dB, and let's compare that. Maybe that's a little bit too quiet now. Let's split the difference. Let's go for 2 dB, so that's an extra dB of gain reduction. I think that's a pretty close match. So that's interesting because that's telling us that over here there's about a dB of total difference between the loudness of the remastered version and the original, but over here, in a different part of the song, we've got a bigger difference, maybe more like 2 dB. So there's a dynamic change that is interesting. It could be that the compression and limiting is getting pushed harder in this section. We can certainly see that the peaks have been reduced, but what that actually sounds like, hopefully you guys have already picked up on my message that trying to judge loudness from looking at peak waveforms is not reliable. Let's go back and listen to that opening section with the cello again.
Distant flickering, screen has scenery, a swear that's bringing it all back again. Great adventures, faces in condensation.
I'm still hearing that warmer EQ in the remastered version. So even though we've now balanced out those overall loudness differences, we can still hear sonic differences, slightly different choices in the EQ between the two. I'm also noticing another difference that I'll come to in a moment. But before I do that, I want to quickly discuss how that change of levels has been achieved. One way to do it would be to simply use automation to reduce certain levels of the song. So for example, to kind of emulate what we're hearing or what we've heard so far, we could do a -1 dB move there. And then if we took this version here and boosted it by another dB, if we put this one back to the overall change of -1. Again, we can't judge it by the waveforms, but that would give us a similar relative difference between the sections of the song. Let's test that.
I'm going outside to take it all in. You say too late to start, got your heart in a head. I don't believe any of it. You say too late to start with your heart in a headlock.
You can still hear those EQ differences, but I think you'll agree the loudness is reasonably well matched in this section here and also in this section here just by using automation moves. That's the kind of thing that I sometimes like to do with my masters. That might be what was done here. I suspect what's actually happened is parallel compression. So I think probably we have a more highly compressed version being blended in, which you hear more of during the quiet moments than the louder moments. But I have no way to know that for certain, and that's just an interesting bit of speculation on my part. The other thing that I was noticing, though, which is very different, is the difference in the stereo imaging. So take a look at the phase scope up here. I will start with the original version.
In condensation, I'm going outside to take it all in. You say too late.
So until those voices came in, that was kind of confined pretty much to the middle here. Let's try the remaster.
In condensation, I'm going outside to take it all in. You say too.
Overall, that is showing a wider distribution. It's showing a wider stereo image, which is what I was expecting based on what I was hearing. I'll flick between those as they play so you can listen to them. Listen to the stuff at the edges of the image and listen to how much wider and more spacious the remaster is.
Distant flickering, screen as scenery, a swear that's bringing it all back again. Great adventures, faces in condensation. I'm going outside to take it all in. You say too late to start, got your heart in a headlock. I don't believe any of it. You say too late to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this.
It's interesting, it also brings up some of that low-level detail, which is what makes me think that it's parallel compression. I'm hearing more of the spacious elements from the remaster, more of the reverb, more of the effects, the little delays that are happening, and I like it. I appreciate all of that. I don't feel it has really any particular negative impact. It's just enhancing my enjoyment of this section of the song, and I'm curious to know whether you think the same thing. Let me know in the comments. So those are the main differences that I'm hearing between these different versions. Overall level differences, more limiting and compression in this, particularly parallel compression, and a wider stereo image. Possible methods for achieving that widening effect could be simply an increasing of the side channel, but I wonder whether it is in fact mid-side EQ. I think it's unlikely to be mid-side compression. Personally, I don't like using mid-side compression except as a kind of disaster recovery tool, but I don't have any inside knowledge in this. I don't have any way of knowing. I did try and get even more analytical by doing a null test between these two, where I invert the polarity of one of the versions, but they don't stay perfectly in sync, probably because analog mastering methods were used. These masters were made 20 years apart, so I'm pretty sure that a different digital clock is being used, which would account for them running at slightly different speeds. A few other things that I noticed about the album. One obvious one is the gaps have been tweaked. You can see here, so this was Headlock, which is song 1, and song 2 comes in more or less at exactly the same point. But when we move across to the third song, we've got a bigger gap there between Say Goodnight and Go and Have You Got It In You. And remember, this is also where the big difference in loudness happens. Let's take a look and remind ourselves. So on the original master, Say Goodnight and Go was at -12, whereas on the remaster it's at -10. So Say Goodnight and Go is 2 dB louder. So when we have this transition, there's a bigger step down in loudness from the end of Say Goodnight and Go to Have You Got It In You. Actually, I say that. Let's listen to that, because maybe there are similar changes in loudness between the sections of the songs in this track as there were in Headlock. So let's just compare quickly.
Say goodnight and go.
There is definitely a loudness difference there as well, and I'm hearing another EQ difference. So we've got a bigger step down in loudness across this transition, but also a slightly longer gap, which is interesting. And that difference in the gaps is retained. You can see it looks kind of similar going from now there, though it looks like the gap has got even wider. I feel like there's a consistent trend. Let's scroll through and see. Yep, it seems like on the whole, the gaps are a little bit longer. There's a little bit more room to breathe between the songs. I've done quite a bit of remastering myself over the years, and usually I would retain exactly the same gaps to the original release, but it's also fairly rare to have the artists present for a remastering session. It'd be interesting to know whether that was a conscious decision or whether that's just something that happened as part of the process of mastering. You know, sometimes if Imogen was coming in for the remaster, she might say, you know, now I've got a chance to revisit this, I would really like a little bit more breathing room between each of the songs. Or maybe it's just they went by feel and that's how it felt right on the day. I guess the final question is, does the loudness difference between the first two songs, which are, so Headlock is about a dB louder, Say Goodnight and Go is about 2 dBs louder, whereas the rest of the album is pretty similar. I think the only other song where there was as much as a dB of difference was Clear the Area. Does that work musically? Does it work emotionally? I'd be interested, again, to know what you guys think. For me, it does. It's actually a fairly subtle change, mainly because Have You Got It In You has quite a quiet beginning. So you go from loud to quiet, and in this case, you're going from somewhat louder to quieter. It's not jarring, but what I usually like to do in these cases is compare the vocal levels. And I do actually think on the original album, there is a little bit of a step up when you get to Have You Got It In You, that this change helps redress. I don't think I'd go so far as to say it was a problem with the original master, but it's certainly a change that I'm completely comfortable with, personally, for this remaster. So overall, I think this is fantastic news if you love this album. It's a new perspective. It's not completely changed. It hasn't gone over the top in the quest for loudness or hype. It's just adding some tasteful, subtle enhancements and allowing me to hear and enjoy them in a new way, which is exactly what you want from a remaster, in my opinion. Everything I love about this album is still there. The loudest moments are a little bit, just a hair louder than I personally would have mastered them, but honestly, I'm not going to quibble about half a dB or a dB when the job has been done this well. Overall, I think if you're an Imogen Heap fan, you should definitely check out this remaster. And if you do, let me know if you enjoyed it as much as I did. So there you go. I hope that was useful or interesting. Let me know in the comments, have you listened to this remaster? What do you think of the sound? Do you hear a difference? Do you like it more than the original? Do you think it's just different but interesting? I'm really curious to know. And let me know your opinion of remasters in general. Are there any remastered albums that you've had a particularly good or bad reaction to? Are you generally skeptical, or are remasters something that you look forward to and enjoy listening to? And if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll also love a free guide I've put together. It's just a simple PDF. It's called the Home Mastering Guide, and it covers the 6 essential steps that I think you need to take before releasing your music with complete confidence. It's completely free, and you can get your copy at homemasteringguide.com. My name is Ian Shepherd. Thanks for listening.